Do you ever feel like the world is too big and your dreams are just too far away? What if I told you that one of the most powerful and influential people on the planet started exactly like that? An ordinary boy, full of curiosity, driven not by wealth or privilege, but by an unstoppable desire to learn. This is the story of Bill Gates. A boy who wasn't born a billionaire, wasn't born a genius, and certainly wasn't destined for greatness at first glance. Yet through passion, determination, and vision, he grew into a name that symbolizes success, innovation, and global impact. Bill Gates' journey isn't just about becoming rich. It's about believing in your dreams when nobody else does. About working so hard that ideas transform into reality, and about never giving up, no matter how tough life gets. His story proves that greatness doesn't come from where you start, but from how far you're willing to go. So as we dive into this journey, I want you to do more than just listen. I want you to feel inspired. Inspired to chase your own dreams no matter how distant they may seem today. Because if an ordinary boy with nothing but curiosity could grow into a man who changed the world, then so can you. And if stories like this ignite something inside you, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and join me on this journey of discovering the lives of people who refuse to settle for ordinary, because your own story is waiting to be written. On October 28, 1955, in the city of Seattle, Washington, a baby was born who would one day reshape the world. His name was William Henry Gates III, though the world would come to know him simply as Bill Gates. At first glance, nothing about his beginnings seemed extraordinary. He wasn't born into royalty, nor did he inherit a vast empire. He was raised in a comfortable middle-class household, surrounded by love, discipline, and strong values. Bill's father, William H. Gates Sr., was a tall and disciplined lawyer who believed in the power of hard work and education. His mother, Mary Maxwell Gates, was intelligent, kind, and deeply involved in her community, working as a teacher before later serving on corporate boards. Together, they provided Bill and his sisters with the stability and guidance every child needs to flourish. Life in the Gates household was not one of luxury, but one of balance. They weren't wealthy, yet they weren't struggling either. It was a home where curiosity was encouraged, questions were welcomed, and education was treated as the greatest investment of all. From a young age, Bill's parents noticed something different about their son. He could stare at a single object for hours, trying to figure out how it worked. That restless curiosity, combined with the steady hand of a supportive family, became the foundation for everything he would achieve later in life. What's remarkable is that no one at the time could have guessed that this small boy from a middle-class Seattle neighborhood would go on to transform technology, philanthropy, and even the way the world lives and learns. His story reminds us that greatness doesn't require being born into riches. It requires the right values, the right environment, and a relentless drive to learn. And if you're inspired by how extraordinary lives often come from ordinary beginnings, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and stay with me as we uncover the next chapter of Bill Gates' journey, where his childhood curiosity begins to shine through. From the very beginning, Bill Gates stood out, not because of wealth, not because of privilege, but because of a hunger that seemed impossible to satisfy. As a child, he was endlessly curious. While other kids might have been playing outside for hours, Bill could often be found in the quiet corners of his home library, his eyes glued to a book. He devoured everything he could get his hands on: science, history, biographies, even law. By the age of 7, he was reading far beyond his years, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. His parents and teachers quickly realized that Bill wasn't just another bright student. He had the kind of restless mind that refused to accept limits. In school, when a teacher asked why he always looked distracted, 9-year-old Bill replied with confidence, "Because I've already read the book." That single sentence captured who he was, a boy who was always a few steps ahead, always searching for more. But Bill's love for learning wasn't about getting good grades or impressing anyone. It was deeper than that. He wanted to understand how the world worked, every mechanism, every idea, every mystery waiting to be solved. His parents often joked that he could stare at something for hours, dissecting it in his mind until he understood it. That insatiable curiosity became one of his greatest strengths. It's easy to overlook these small moments from childhood, but they matter. Because behind every great innovator, Every world changer is often a child who refused to stop asking questions, who refused to stop learning. Bill Gates's brilliance didn't just come from talent. It came from a daily habit of feeding his mind, of never being satisfied with what he already knew. And here's the truth. You and I have that same power. The question is, are we willing to nurture it? Are we willing to stay curious, to keep learning even when it's uncomfortable? Bill's story shows us that the love of learning is more than just a childhood phase. It's the foundation of a life that can change the world. If this inspires you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and join me as we move forward into the next part of Bill Gates's journey, where his restless curiosity leads him to the place that would change his life forever. In school, Bill Gates was anything but ordinary. While many of his classmates struggled to keep up with lessons, Bill often found himself far ahead. Teachers noticed that he seemed distracted, restless, even bored during class. But it wasn't because he didn't care. It was because he had already mastered the material. His sharp mind was always hungry for the next challenge, the next idea to unravel. This restlessness sometimes created tension. Teachers complained that he didn't follow rules, that he seemed uninterested in what was being taught. But Bill wasn't lazy. He simply needed a greater challenge than what the traditional classroom could provide. His parents, recognizing that their son was different, made a decision that would alter the course of his life. They enrolled him in Lakeside School, a private institution known for nurturing gifted and curious minds. At Lakeside, Bill found the environment he had been craving. Surrounded by bright students and supportive teachers, he was no longer seen as the restless boy who didn't fit in. Instead, he was encouraged to explore, to question, to push himself beyond limits. And it was here, within the walls of this school, that Bill would encounter something that changed his destiny forever: computers. In the late 1960s, computers were not what we know today. They were massive machines, locked away in corporations and universities far beyond the reach of most teenagers. Yet Lakeside had one. And the moment Bill touched a keyboard for the very first time, it was as if he had discovered a new world. A world where his curiosity had no boundaries, where his imagination could be transformed into reality through programming. The restless boy who once couldn't sit still in class had finally found something that could hold his attention for hours: computers. That spark of discovery would ignite a fire inside him, one that would grow stronger with every passing year. And as we move forward in his story, you'll see how that fire, born from restlessness and fueled by curiosity, set the stage for Bill Gates to one day change the world. If you're inspired by how a single opportunity can unlock a lifetime of passion, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and stay with me for the next chapter, when Bill creates his very first computer program. It was at Lakeside School where Bill Gates's life took a dramatic turn. In the late 1960s, very few people in the world, let alone teenagers, had access to a computer. These machines were enormous, expensive, and reserved for businesses, scientists, and universities. Yet somehow Lakeside had one, and the moment young Bill laid eyes on it, something inside him clicked. What most students saw as a strange, intimidating machine, Bill saw as endless possibility. He would rush to the computer lab every chance he got, sometimes skipping recess, sometimes staying late just to spend more time with it. Hours passed like minutes as he typed commands, watched the screen respond, and realized that here was a tool that allowed him to build entire worlds from pure logic. At just 13 years old, Bill created his very first computer program, a simple game of tic-tac-toe. Two players could challenge each other, while the computer decided who won. It might sound small today, but back then this was revolutionary. Imagine being a teenager in the 1960s, building something that most adults couldn't even comprehend. That little game proved something crucial. Bill wasn't just using the computer, he was already mastering it. This was the beginning of an obsession. Bill didn't treat computers as a hobby. For him, it became a world of exploration, of challenge, of creation. His friends would later recall that he could spend hours, sometimes entire nights, lost in programming, driven by a passion that few could understand. Looking back, that first encounter wasn't just about a boy learning to program. It was the moment when Bill Gates found his life's calling. From that single tic-tac-toe game, he discovered the power of technology, the power to create, to innovate, and eventually, to change the world. And that's the beauty of it. Sometimes the biggest revolutions begin with the smallest sparks. Bill's spark came from a school computer and a childhood game. What could yours be? If you're inspired by how a simple curiosity grew into a world-changing vision, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and continue this journey with me, because next, we'll see how this teenage passion turned into his very first business venture. At Lakeside School, Bill Gates wasn't alone in his fascination with computers. Among the students who spent long hours in the computer lab was another brilliant mind, Paul Allen. Bill was younger, intense and fiercely competitive, while Paul, a couple of years older, was calm, thoughtful, and deeply analytical. On the surface, they were different, but beneath those differences was something extraordinary, a shared obsession with the future of technology. The two quickly bonded over their love for programming, often spending countless hours side by side, exploring what these mysterious machines could really do. They weren't just using computers, they were imagining their future. And it was in those conversations, in those long sessions of trial and error, that a radical vision began to take shape. Bill and Paul believed something that almost no one else dared to dream. One day, every home would have its own computer. Think about how bold that idea was in the early 1970s. Computers were massive, expensive, and reserved for governments and corporations. The thought of a personal computer sitting on a desk in an ordinary household sounded impossible, even laughable. But not to Bill and Paul. They could already see it. The future where computers would become as common as televisions or telephones. This friendship was more than just companionship. It was a partnership built on vision. Bill brought his relentless drive and competitiveness, while Paul brought patience and big-picture thinking. Together they pushed each other further, challenged one another's ideas, and fueled a dream that seemed outrageous at the time. What started as two teenagers bonding over machines at Lakeside was, in truth, the beginning of a revolution. Because the friendship between Bill Gates and Paul Allen wasn't just about friendship, it was about destiny. The two would go on to change not just their own lives, but the entire course of human history. And as we continue this story, you'll see how that shared vision of a computer in every home would grow into the foundation of Microsoft itself. If you're inspired by how powerful the right partnership can be, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and join me as we move into the next stage, when Bill and Paul turn their teenage dreams into their very first business adventure. At just 18 years old, Bill Gates walked through the gates of one of the most prestigious universities in the world, Harvard. For most students, being at Harvard meant pursuing traditional careers, law, medicine, business, or academia. But for Bill, it was never about following the well-worn path. His heart and mind were still fixed on the glowing screens of computers, while his classmates buried themselves in textbooks preparing for their futures. Bill spent endless hours in Harvard's computer labs, programming, experimenting, and dreaming of possibilities that few others could even imagine. Professors admired his sharp mind, yet some were puzzled by his intensity. They saw a brilliant student who wasn't interested in becoming a doctor or a lawyer, but instead obsessed with a field that, at the time, seemed niche and uncertain. But Bill wasn't uncertain. He was convinced that computers weren't just machines for specialists. They were the future of humanity. He knew, deep down, that the world would one day revolve around them, and he wanted to be at the very center of that revolution. And even at Harvard, Bill's determination stood out. His classmates often recalled how he could disappear for days, immersing himself in code, skipping classes, and working through nights without rest. For him, success wasn't about fitting in or following expectations. It was about chasing a vision only he could see. It's important to remember, this was the mid-1970s. The personal computer industry didn't exist yet. Companies weren't building PCs for homes or offices. The idea still sounded far-fetched to most. But to Bill, it wasn't a dream, it was inevitable. Harvard was supposed to be his path to success, but in truth, it became the stepping stone to something much bigger, the leap into a future he was determined to create. And soon, his time at Harvard would collide with destiny, when an opportunity appeared that was too great to ignore. That opportunity would force him to make one of the boldest decisions of his life. If you're inspired by Bill's courage to follow a vision that no one else believed in, hit that like button, subscribe, and get ready for the next chapter. when a magazine article sparks the moment that changes everything. In 1975, a single magazine article changed everything. Bill Gates was still at Harvard, torn between the safe path of education and the restless pull of his vision. One day, flipping through popular electronics, he came across the cover story of a new machine, the Altair 8800. It was small, boxy and crude by today's standards, but to Bill, it was a glimpse into the future, a personal computer that could finally bring their dream within reach. He immediately called his old friend Paul Allen. Together, they knew this was their moment. If the Altair was to succeed, it would need software, programs that could unlock its potential. And who better to build that software than two young men who had spent their lives obsessed with computers? Fueled by excitement, Bill and Paul reached out to the makers of the Altair, claiming they had already developed a working programming language for it. In reality, they hadn't written a single line of code yet, but they believed so strongly in their vision that they were willing to take the leap. For weeks, they worked tirelessly, coding day and night, until they finally produced a version of BASIC that ran on the Altair. When the software worked perfectly, it was more than just a technical success, it was the birth of something far greater. In that moment, Bill and Paul realized they weren't just programmers. They were pioneers standing at the beginning of an industry. With courage and conviction, Bill made the life-altering decision to drop out of Harvard. He and Paul Allen co-founded a company they named Microsoft, a blend of microcomputer and software. It was a bold gamble, walking away from Harvard, from security, from the traditional future that everyone expected of him. Bill chose instead to chase a vision most people thought was impossible. But that leap of faith was the spark that ignited a revolution. Microsoft was born, not in a boardroom, not in a laboratory, but in the minds of two dreamers who believed that someday, every home would have a computer. And as history shows, they were right. If you're inspired by the courage to take risks for what you believe in, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and stay with me, because next, we'll see how this little startup called Microsoft would explode into a company that transformed the entire world. The early days of Microsoft were anything but glamorous. Bill Gates and Paul Allen had no office, no steady income, and almost no resources to speak of. Their headquarters was often a borrowed desk, a cluttered motel room, or wherever they could set up their computers. They were young, ambitious, and running purely on vision. Clients were scarce, money was tight, and the world still didn't fully understand why software would matter. But what set Bill apart was his determination. He was relentless, constantly pushing, negotiating, and programming with the belief that their time would come. And in 1980, it finally did. That year, tech giant IBM was preparing to enter the personal computer market. They needed an operating system, software that would allow their machines to run. At the time, IBM was the most powerful name in computing, and landing a deal with them would mean instant credibility. Bill saw this as the opportunity of a lifetime. Here's where the story takes a legendary turn. Microsoft didn't even have an operating system ready. But Bill, always the strategist, promised IBM that they could deliver. He then went out and acquired an existing system called QDOS from another developer, refined it, and transformed it into what became known as MS-DOS. The deal was brilliant. Instead of selling the system outright, Bill negotiated to license it to IBM. That single decision meant Microsoft retained the rights to their software, allowing them to license it to other companies as well. Suddenly, MS-DOS wasn't just IBM's system. It became the backbone of nearly every personal computer on the market. In one bold move, Microsoft went from a struggling startup to a dominant force in technology. And Bill Gates, barely in his mid-20s, had positioned his company not just as a supplier, but as the very heart of the personal computer revolution. What began in borrowed spaces and sleepless nights was now a global story. The world was waking up to Microsoft, and to the man with the vision of a computer on every desk, in every home. If this turning point inspires you, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay tuned, because next, we'll see how Microsoft didn't just grow, but rose to dominate the entire software industry. By the mid-1980s, Microsoft had already carved out its place in the tech world with MS-DOS. But Bill Gates knew that the future of computing wasn't just about function, it was about accessibility. Computers needed to be user-friendly. not just for engineers and programmers, but for ordinary people. And so, in 1985, Microsoft launched a product that would change everything: Windows. Unlike the text-based world of MS-DOS, Windows introduced a graphical interface, icons, menus, and the ability to navigate with a mouse. Suddenly, computers weren't intimidating black screens filled with code. They became interactive, approachable, and ready for everyday use. This wasn't just a product launch, it was a revolution. But Microsoft wasn't alone in chasing this dream. At the very same time, a fiery visionary named Steve Jobs was leading Apple with his own bold vision of personal computing. Where Gates was methodical, pragmatic, and business-focused, Jobs was artistic, perfectionist, and design-driven. Their rivalry wasn't just between two companies. It was a clash of philosophies. Bill believed in spreading software everywhere, making it affordable and accessible to the masses. Jobs believed in building tightly controlled, beautifully designed machines that blended hardware and software seamlessly. Their approaches were different, but their ambition was the same: to transform technology and, in turn, the way people lived. The rivalry between Microsoft and Apple in the 1980s became the stuff of legend. Critics and fans often painted it as a bitter feud, but in reality, it was competition that fueled innovation. Each pushed the other to go further, to dream bigger, to move faster. Windows quickly gained dominance because of its adaptability across different hardware, while Apple remained a smaller but fiercely innovative player. Together, these two visionaries reshaped the future of computing, one through accessibility, the other through artistry. And Bill Gates, with the launch of Windows, cemented Microsoft as the software powerhouse that would dominate the industry for decades. What started as lines of code in a borrowed office had now evolved into technology, shaping the daily lives of millions. If you're inspired by how ambition and competition can drive progress, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and stay tuned, because next, we'll dive into Microsoft's rise to global dominance and how Bill Gates became one of the richest men in the world. By the mid-1980s, Bill Gates had gone from a restless boy tinkering with computers to a titan of technology. And in 1987, at just 31 years old, he achieved something that stunned the world. He became the youngest self-made billionaire in history. For most people, that would have been the pinnacle of success. But for Bill, it was never just about the money. Wealth was a byproduct of his vision, not the vision itself. Even with unimaginable riches, Bill kept his life surprisingly grounded. He was known for his modest habits, driving himself to work, eating at local diners, and working long hours in a small office. Success hadn't changed the core of who he was, a man obsessed with solving problems and pushing technology forward. But life wasn't only about business. In 1994, Bill married Melinda French, a brilliant Microsoft executive who shared not just his intelligence, but also his values and compassion. Together, they built a family rooted in love, humility, and discipline. Despite being one of the wealthiest men in the world, Bill and Melinda were determined to raise their 3 children without spoiling them. They believed in teaching responsibility, kindness, and the importance of hard work, values that echoed the same upbringing Bill had received in his middle-class Seattle home. Away from the spotlight, Bill was still a father who read to his children at night, set limits on screen time, and insisted on family dinners. Despite his empire, he remained deeply committed to the role of husband and father. This chapter of Bill's life shows us something powerful. Success is not only measured in billions or in business empires. True success is also about the relationships you build, the values you pass on, and the humility you maintain, even at the top of the world. And yet, even as he enjoyed the joys of family life, Bill's story was far from over. Ahead of him was a transformation that would redefine not only his legacy, but also the meaning of wealth and responsibility. If you're inspired by the balance of ambition and family, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and join me in the next chapter where Bill Gates steps away from the day-to-day at Microsoft and begins his journey as one of the greatest philanthropists of our time. With Microsoft dominating the software industry by the 1990s, Bill Gates had risen to a position few could even imagine. Windows was running on the majority of the world's personal computers, and Microsoft seemed unstoppable. But with great power came great scrutiny, and soon, Bill and his company were at the center of controversy. Critics argued that Microsoft wasn't just winning, it was crushing the competition. The company was accused of using its dominance to block rivals, control markets, and maintain an unfair monopoly. These whispers of criticism grew louder until they reached the highest levels of government. In 1998, the U.S. Department of Justice filed an antitrust case against Microsoft, accusing the company of stifling innovation and violating competition laws. For Bill Gates, this was one of the toughest moments of his career. He was no longer just the boy genius building software in a small office. He was the face of a global empire under attack. The media painted him as ruthless, and the courtroom battles dragged Microsoft's reputation into question. It seemed as if everything he had built was at risk. But here's what defined Bill: resilience. Instead of collapsing under the weight of criticism, he fought back. He defended his company, adjusted strategies, and continued to innovate. Though the legal battles were exhausting and the judgment forced Microsoft to change some of its business practices, the company survived. More importantly, Bill learned from the experience. He began to see that power wasn't just about winning. It was about responsibility, perception, and adapting when the world demanded change. The antitrust case marked a turning point. It challenged Bill to evolve not just as a businessman, but as a leader. He came out of it not broken, but sharper, more reflective, and ready for the next stage of his life. This chapter of Bill's story reminds us that even the most successful people face storms. What matters is not avoiding challenges, but how you respond when they come. If this lesson of resilience inspires you, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and join me for the next part. When Bill Gates begins shifting from tech titan to global philanthropist, reshaping his legacy forever. By the dawn of the new millennium, Bill Gates stood at the pinnacle of wealth and influence. He had built a software empire, changed the way the world used technology, and amassed a fortune unlike anything seen before. But in 2000, he did something remarkable. He began to shift his focus from building Microsoft to changing humanity. Together with his wife, Bill founded the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, an organization that would become one of the most powerful forces for good in modern history. Its mission was bold: to tackle the world's toughest problems that governments and corporations often overlooked. The foundation poured billions into fighting global health crises. They invested in vaccines for diseases like polio and malaria, saving millions of lives in the poorest parts of the world. They worked to provide clean water and sanitation to communities that had gone without these basic human needs. They championed education, funding schools, libraries, and scholarships to give children opportunities that poverty had denied them. But Bill didn't stop there. As the years passed, he turned his attention to one of the greatest challenges of our time: climate change. He began funding research and innovation to create clean energy solutions, pushing the idea that human ingenuity could help save the planet. And in 2010, alongside his close friend Warren Buffett, Bill co-created the Giving Pledge, a commitment from the world's wealthiest individuals to give away the majority of their fortunes to help solve global challenges. For Bill, wealth was never the end goal, it was a tool. A tool that could be used to rewrite the future for millions of people.